Utah has officially named Morgan Scalley their next head coach in waiting. What does it mean? We're diving into it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's Locked On College, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase today. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we have to talk about not exactly breaking news, as this has all been kind of expected for a while, that Morgan Scalley was the head coach in waiting for Utah and had actually been signed and sealed and kept in the Utah Athletic Department for a long time. But news did officially come out about that. So we'll talk about what that means, as well as if Utah can remain on top with Morgan Scalley. And as we inch closer to the Utah football season, Big 12 media days are right around the corner, and Utah announced who they'll be sending. So we're going to talk about that at the very end of the show. But first, want to talk about the official news that Morgan Scalley was named the next head coach in waiting for Utah football. As a statement put out on the Utah Athletics website reads, University of Utah Athletic Director Mark Harlan shared that the University of Utah entered into a new employment agreement with defensive coordinator Morgan Scalley on November 3rd, 2023, which is hilarious that this was in November. And here we are on the 1st of July, by the time you guys hear this the 2nd, reacting to this news. And the report is they do formally designate Scalley as the football program's head coach in waiting. And how about this? Coach Scalley is entering year 17 on the staff. I knew had been here for a minute, but I didn't realize it was year 17. That longevity, how long he's been at Utah, is going to be very important when we talk about that brand success. But look, none of us are surprised, right? Morgan Scalley is the clear candidate to take over for Kyle Whittingham on the staff. You can tell just based on the way he conducts media stuff, the clips you see of the way he leads the defense. He is a natural leader of men. And when you want to be a head coach of a college football program, that's a big thing. He commands a room. He commands respect. And I think he is the ideal candidate and will succeed as Utah's next head coach. This defense has flourished amongst him. He is truly a Kyle Whittingham disciple. He has followed and grown up under Kyle Whittingham. Everything that Kyle wants, played for Kyle, of course, too. So all of that wrapped in here, and you get the reasons why Morgan, I just feel like, is going to end up being a fantastic coach for this University of Utah team. I just feel like that everything is going to end up lining up for him to have success in that next chapter. And look, not just because he is a defensive guru, right? Just like Kyle Whittingham was, but really because of those leadership qualities that we talked about. I just think he is a guy who can command a locker room. He will keep the culture in place. That's the biggest thing for the next head coach of Utah, right? You need to be able to keep the culture in place, keep the guys accountable, make sure this program stays to where everyone that enters it, you must adapt to what Utah wants to do in order to be successful. Utah's not going to be like, we'll give you this leeway to do this because you're a talented player and we'll bend to you. That's not what successful programs do. And Morgan Scalley does not seem like that type. He is a Kyle Whittingham guy in terms of the no nonsense and everything that goes in there. So I absolutely think that this was the right move for Utah. And I do expect Morgan Scalley to do a tremendous job leading this Utah football team into the next era of college football, which figures to be crazy, but the consistency that Morgan will provide, I think, will be extremely pivotal. And obviously, when you're talking about Morgan Scalley, one of the big reasons that he originally had this title taken away from him a few years ago was the racial slur that was included in a text back in 2013. And he was suspended. They evaluated it and they decided to keep him on the staff. I do believe they reduced his pay and then went from there. And we didn't really know what was going to happen. And that was a few years ago that came out. 2013 was obviously 11 years ago, so a long time. So that happened. That report all came out when I was not hosting the podcast. And we've touched on it a little bit here, but I do want to share my thoughts about how I feel about that and how I feel about them now naming Morgan the head coach. Obviously, he made a terrible mistake and decision, and one that it sounds like he has learned from, and I believe he has learned from because of the way his former players speak about him. This is always a difficult thing to talk about because I don't personally know Morgan Scalley. I've interacted with him in a media scrum, I believe, if I remember back during my time in Salt Lake correctly. But everything I've seen and heard from him is that he's a really good guy. And it sounds like he made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but one that I don't think should define him and one that he should be allowed to learn and grow from. And it sounds like that's what's happened is he has learned, he's grown, and he's changed. I have always put more stock into what the players say about Morgan Scalley than what have just, like I said, than what we're going to read about. And there was an incident here, but the overwhelming evidence suggests that's not the type of person he is. So that's why I'm glad he's been given the opportunity. I believe in second chances when you make a mistake. And that was a mistake by Morgan Scalley. He owned up to it. He paid, there was a penalty to be paid for it. He had to win some trust back. He was able to do so. And the fact that his former players speak so glowingly, the fact that they're coming out fired up, that he has his opportunity, to me shows that's the more of the guy he is. The coach who loves his players, who would do anything for them. And he has learned and grown from that mistake. So that's why I believe he would still deserve to be selected for this position. I think, once again, he is a clear leader of men. He is a guy who has learned under Kyle Whittingham and going to keep the culture the same. When you have success like Utah's had here, that you haven't experienced it over this long of a period of time. I know what Ron McBride was able to do, of course, but like when you just have a culture this special, you don't hire outside to me. You hire internally. Think Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. When Urban Meyer left, hiring Kyle Whittingham for Utah worked out pretty great, right? And Utah is a unique place because of the culture that has been instilled. If you hire a new coach, you risk shaking up and changing that. And I think it's great that Utah is going to keep that same culture in place by keeping Morgan Scalley there. The standard will remain the same because he was part of the success. When, players aren't going to question his credibility, right? He's like, he was been a part of all of this success. He's helped develop guys. He's part of the reason that Utah has a seat at the table of, in my opinion, the top 5 DBUs in the country. It's because of Morgan Scalley. And we talk about on this show all the time. In Sharif Shaw and Morgan Scalley, we trust in terms of the Utah secondary. That's why, even though there's some turnover this year, I'm not that worried because the Utah secondary is always good. And what's the constant amidst all the change of the players? The coaching. Morgan Scalley is a big part of that. And he's also done a tremendous job with this Utah defense. Kyle Whittingham sets the tone, but Morgan's the one who calls the plays. And he's elevated this Utah defense to a high level. And USC wanted him, right? And not just USC. I think Urban Meyer, when he went to Jacksonville, he wanted him. He's one of the best defensive minds in the country, shown by the fact that other coaches want to hire him. And I think he's got a chance to be a great head coach because of those leadership qualities, because of the success he's had, because he knows what it takes for a winning program to do. This is a great move by the University of Utah. And I feel confident that whenever Coach Whittingham steps down, Utah will not have much of a drop-off. There might be a slight one, take a couple of years or two, maybe a small adjustment, but overall, I expect Utah to still be right there because of what a good coach Morgan Scalley, I believe, will turn out to be. But that's just what I think. I do want to hear from you guys. How do you think? Do you think Morgan's the right guy for the job? How do you think it's going to play out? And I do want to talk about why I feel like Utah will remain on top, because that's obviously very important. We're going to be diving in and discussing that in one moment. But first, I want to talk with you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. It is our great friends at Gametime. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets. They're an authorized marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have amazing last-minute deals, all in price views from your seat. Their lowest price guarantee, where Gametime truly takes the guessing work out of buying MLB tickets. There are so many fantastic features when it comes to Gametime, whether it's saving up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concert, comedy, and theater events near you. How about flash deals, where you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event? You can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seat with zone deals. Or how about seat views, where you get a panoramic view from the seat in the app before you buy? So also that lowest price guarantee, where Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. They also have fantastic ticket coverage. The Gametime ticket coverage allows you to purchase your ticket with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCALL, just capital L and all of college capitalized for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All righty, let's talk about why I think Morgan Scalley is going to allow Utah to remain on top in the Big 12. And I do believe is consistently one of the 10 to 15 best programs in college football. Let's talk about what Morgan has done as defensive coordinator, because obviously his success as the DC for Utah is why I feel so confidently with him. And I thought the University of Utah Athletics on their website, what they posted, did a great job laying out some interesting statistical nuggets of how successful Morgan's been at Utah. This comes to us directly from that article on their website announcing Morgan as the head coach in waiting. Scalley has led Utah to finishes in the top half of the Pac-12 in total defense 7 times, ranking second nationally and first in the league in 2019. That 2019 defense was nasty. That was a side note, obviously not in the piece, but I got to imagine whoever wrote it would agree with that. He has directed the Pac-12's top rushing defense 5 times, including 5 times in the last 8 years, including a top 5 national ranking in 2018, 2019, and 2023. Utah has finished as the top of the conference in sacks and tackles for loss 3 times under Scalley, most recently back-to-back seasons, 21 and 22. Hey, that was the year Utah went back-to-back in Pac-12 championships. Coincidence? I think not. The team also finished the 2018 season ranked 11th nationally and first in the Pac-12 in sacks. So all of those are a lot of stats and a lot of numbers. But what is one of the common themes and trends about them? There are multiple statistics over a multi-year span of Morgan being a successful and strong defensive coordinator. The 2019 defense was the best statistically of that bunch. But once again, also, right, the back-to-back seasons, you're finishing the conference in tackles for loss, the rushing defense being what it was last year. There's been turnover, but Utah has continued to bring in and develop defensive talent at an elite level. Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley playing a part in it have built an incredible defensive staff. Coach Powell and Coach Ellis managed the defensive line. Coach Swan with the linebackers. We already mentioned Coach Scalley and Shaw in the secondary. All of them are amazing, and they do a tremendous job developing talent and leading them in each individual game. Utah also doesn't turn over coaches. It's something they've done at a very high level. That speaks to how strong of a program that Utah has. In fact, there's a quote in the Utah Athletics website where they say Whittingham's 10 assistant coaches has an average tenure of 7.4 seasons with Utah, the most longevity by a power conference staff, which includes Scalley's 16 years with the program. That's incredible that Utah has had that much success retaining coaches. They preach, family on 3. People say that all the time, right? When the Utah football team does. The coaching staff, it's obviously that way as well, because they understand how special of a place this is. Hence why they don't really want to leave. And that's a huge credit to Coach Witt for building that. And Morgan Scalley has so many Witt-isms, just like the personality traits and the way he acts and all of that, that I don't expect that to change. Morgan has done a great job also when you're talking about the future of college football. It's recruiting still going to play a huge role in that. And the transfer portal continuing to embrace that, which Utah has done. And I think Morgan is going to be able to look at and say, this is how Kyle was able to adapt to the transfer portal. You don't bring in all of these guys through the transfer portal, but you bring in the right guys that fit your system and plug in specific holes in your roster that you lose with a senior. And the benefits can be pretty good. You cannot ignore the transfer portal and be successful in today's era of college football. Look at Clemson with Dabo Swinney. They've had some really disappointing losses. And I have to imagine they would have been able to avoid some of those if they had brought in players from the transfer portal, because that's what everyone else is doing and having success. But you can't go transfer portal crazy like Colorado or a USC, because we've seen that also doesn't work. So I think there's been so much that Kyle Whittingham has done right. And even in the past, right, Kyle's not perfect. He's made some mistakes with roster management, offensive coordinator hires, all the things like that, where Morgan's been able to watch and see how that all goes too. I think Morgan has also realized the value in having a really strong offensive coordinator for your defensive mind. Hopefully Andy Ludwig goes for a long time, but he'll probably eventually retire too. So I expect Morgan to hire an offensive coordinator that he's going to empower, that he'll watch over in a sense, just like Kyle at times, I feel like, make sure that Andy is extra cautious with the ball and when Utah should be throwing it, when instead they run it to be more cautious. Morgan will probably do that some, but I do think he's going to realize, like, hey, I'm not going to step over and get out of my comfort zone doing too much offensively, because I've seen that's not how an offense thrives, as Utah's had a lot of success, which is letting Andy Ludwig be Andy Ludwig. With Cam Rising healthy, the last 2 years he played, 21-22, his team won Pac-12 championships. Part of that was those phenomenal defensive statistics we led. Part of that was also the offense and Kyle Whittingham letting Andy Ludwig in many ways run his offense in his scheme. So I think Morgan's been able to see that. Let's go back to the recruiting thing. Morgan's done a great job recruiting Texas. High school recruiting is still incredibly important, and Morgan has done a great job at recruiting. So I expect that to continue. Obviously, as Kyle Whittingham gets up there in age too, you got to wonder how, and the name Kyle Whittingham has recruited itself in many ways. Like I'm sure Morgan, a lot of these position coaches, they've been doing a lot of the recruiting work. I expect that those guys have been more involved and Whitt's been, more hands off than say a new head coach would be, right? Because they are trying to do more and they don't have that longevity and that success just to kind of lean back on. Kyle Whittingham's obviously been involved in the recruiting efforts, but I'm just saying, I think that these coaches have had a lot of experience recruiting because Kyle Whittingham I think he empowers his assistants. He doesn't hang over them on everything and isn't too domineering and controlling. That I think these guys have experience recruiting. So without Kyle Whittingham, they're still going to be able to recruit and they're still going to be able to talk about the Utah brand that's still intact. When Kyle Whittingham leaves, I'm sure they tell these guys nothing's going to change. We're promoting someone who played here, who understands the culture, who understands the system, knows what it takes to be successful here. And that's Morgan Scalley. And Morgan is going to do things the Utah way. And recruits are going to buy in knowing that they're committing to the Utah way. Just because Kyle Whittingham is gone doesn't mean the standard changes. He's going to be able to keep that at a high level. And that is so big, right? The continuity, the culture, those are massive words when you're talking about a football program. If you don't have continuity, that can be a worrisome thing. You're going to commit somewhere, but job security is a concern. That makes recruits less likely to commit somewhere because then you get that coaching staff gets fired or there's change, someone leaves, and it's like, well, the guy who recruited me is not here. That's not an issue at Utah. And that's something that is fantastic that they have built up that strong rapport with coaches that allows them to stay. And that's Kyle Whittingham understood the value of that. I think Morgan Scalley would too. So I expect Utah's recruiting not to drop off at all. Morgan Scalley knows what it takes to be a successful recruiter. He's watched how Utah has had success recruiting. He's been a large part of that recruiting success. And I think Utah will get even more involved in Texas too, as the Big 12 era continues to go on and you're recruiting for some of the top players in the country where you have a geographical footprint now due to your placement in the Big 12. And I think that's a big thing for Utah too. So Morgan's great there. Obviously defensive coordinator. I'll be interested to see if he gives up play calling duties. I don't expect him to. Although, though, I say that, and I mean, Sharif Shaw is fantastic. So I could see him give it up to Sharif Shaw. I'm very interested to see how that transition works if Morgan does want to give it up and just be the CEO type. I could see Morgan doing it for 1 year and then maybe giving it up to Sharif. Or maybe he just gives it up right away. I think Sharif would be ready whenever he gets the call. I'm sure he has aspirations of being a defensive coordinator. I think he'd be a great one. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Sharif's a head coach someday. As much as I was talking about the continuity, and I hope Sharif never leaves, I think he'd be a great head coach. I think there's a number of coaches on Utah staff. Jim Harding's another one I think could be a strong one. Like there's lots of potential coaches on Utah staff with head coach that could be great head coaches. But for summarizing why I think Morgan will be so successful with Utah is he knows what it takes. He's learned from the best under Kyle Whittingham. He's had a lot of success with Kyle Whittingham. He's an incredible defensive mind who makes great adjustments, who recruits and develops the right type of players for his system. The Utah defense is going to continue to be in a strong place. The Utah football team is going to continue to be in a strong place because Morgan Scalley has had the best seat in the house at one of the best coaches in college football in recent memory. Kyle Whittingham, a model for consistency. That's who he's been able to observe and absorb all of that knowledge, which will, in my opinion, make Morgan the next great Utah head coach. I expect Morgan to go a long time. I don't know if he'll go 20 years, but I do think he'll go 10 plus unless he were to do well enough to potentially want to move somewhere else. But he's turned down all these jobs before. I expect him to want to stay at Utah. And I think he's got a great chance to retire as Utah's head coach. I'll say that much about Morgan Scalley. I think he has that great of a leadership potential and quality. And I guess I forgot to circle back to that going to the first segment. Another reason I think he's going to be a great head coach and Utah will remain on top is because he is a natural leader of men who is ready to steer Utah football into the next era of college football. And while I'm talking more the long term, obviously with Morgan Scalley, because he's still the head coach in waiting at the moment, he's going to do a great job as a defensive coordinator this year. And a couple of his star defensive players are Karene Reed and Junior Tufuna, who were two of the four players that Utah has selected to send to Big 12 Media Days. They will be speaking on Tuesday, July 9th. Utah will be sending head coach Kyle Whittingham, of course, Brant Kuithe, Corrine Reed, Cam Rising, and Junior Tafuna. No surprises here. These are the leaders of the team, right? You're talking about some of the longest tenured player. All of these guys were a part of the first Pac-12 championship in 2021, all of them playing instrumental roles. Even Corrine Reed, right? Coming in a couple of key spots, right? When it was Devin Lloyd and Nephi Sewell. I think Sewell or Lloyd, one of them got hurt that year. I can't remember off the top of my head right now at times. And Reed stepped up there, and we knew he was going to be in for a big 2022, and he was. He's emerged as a leader on this defense ever since, coming off a great season a year ago. And I think this will be his last year with Utah, and I expect him to go out with another sensational campaign. Junior Tafuna was the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. His emergence and when this team really separated itself were very similar. So dominant in that first Oregon game and terrorized the Ducks once again, the Pac-12 championship, and has led this Utah defense in many ways to having such an elite rushing defense. And Reed's a part of that too with his surefire tackling. But Tafuna's the guy who absorbs those double teams, does a fantastic job pushing the pocket too when left one-on-one, and is a true leader up front that's had a ton of experience, leads Utah in many of their chants before the game, a true leader on one of the best defenses in the country, what I expect it to be. So love the defensive selections. How about Brant Kuithe? A healthy Brant Kuithe is one of the best players, best pass catchers in the Big 12, and one of the best tight ends in the nation. He's absolutely deserves to be on this list. Kuithe's healthy. He's had a long time to get ramped back up. I expect him to have a monster year, and I'm excited he's included in this as well, too, because he's going to be a household name in the Big 12 this year. I absolutely believe that, and be a first-team all-conference selection when it's all said and done. And speaking of household names, they don't get any bigger than Cam Rising. The two-time Pac-12 champion who missed last season due to that injury is going to be in attendance for Pac-12 Media Days. He's the leader of the Utah football program, at least as it comes to on the field. Kyle Whittingham said he's one of the best leaders he's ever been around. Thick Boy 7, Bad Moon Rising, whatever you want to call him. He's been clutch. He's been incredible. And he is such a large part of the reason Utah has those two Pac-12 championships. He is the number one reason, in my opinion, they're favored to win the Big 12 this year. Obviously, overall, we could talk like reasons they're favorite the team, but the confidence you have with Cam Rising back, a guy who's faced off against some of the top college quarterbacks in the country and held his own, who's made plays in the biggest of moments, who's come up with championships and has balled out even in Rose Bowls. Cam Rising is electric. He's incredible. And I expect him to have a great final year at Utah. He's going to go down as one of the best quarterbacks to ever play. And I'm glad the Big 12 media will get a taste of a guy who's obviously become a fan favorite for not just his play on the field, but some of those funny, memorable press conference moments and other things that we've gotten to see from Cam over the years. So great selection of players for Big 12 Media Day. I genuinely think this is the four that I probably would have sent to. You can maybe argue it was Zamaya Vaughn over a Corrine Reed. We'd just like to get a secondary guy in there, but honestly, Reed is a great selection for everything he's been able to do too. And yeah, I got zero issues with the selections. Excited to hear from these guys, get some more off-season content. And this is just that reminder we're getting closer to the start of the season with the arrival of Big 12 Media Days. We'll be covering Big 12 Media Days on next week's show, and we're always covering Utah. So we're going to have it whenever Kyle Whittingham does eventually step down and Morgan Scalley will be stepping into the Utah head coaching chair. So lots of fun times for the Utah athletic department right now. Can't wait to see how everything ends up shaking out as it comes to this season and beyond. And if you guys love Utah football as much as me, make sure you like and subscribe, and would once again love to talk with you guys in the comments. What do you guys think of the players that Utah sent? How do you feel about Morgan Scalley? All that and more, let me know below, and we'll be back this week. Fun series we're going to be doing the rest of the week. I'm going to be talking about each individual position group at Utah and talking about the present and future. There's a lot of noise about recruiting, and if Utah, there's been some downward trends at times for sure, but they've also added some strong players. And I think the state of each Utah position group is actually in a pretty good place. You can tune in tomorrow and find out if you agree with me. But that's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day.